Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome, friends, folks, enemies, frenemies. It's me, your friendly neighborhood Alex Coulombe, here to give you another talk at Unreal Fest. Glad everyone's here. It's been really fun the past few days. You guys know me. This is like Christmas, having this community around. And today we're going to talk about a little present that I hope you'll find to be fun to open. The best template you're not using, maximizing the Collab viewer, and it'll be me talking about it. So, link for deck there. You'll see a little fun prize if you open that QR code right now. And the things we're going to cover are basically the Collab viewer, what it is, what you get out of the box, some of the ways we can extend it, some case studies, maybe a bit of a live demo. We'll see how that goes on my 2 hours of sleep. It's going to be great. And so first, for those who don't know me, who's driving this train? This is me. This is me. And eyebrows. Those are the eyebrows when I came up with that handle when I was like 12 years old. I was very proud of my eyebrows. And a few quick things about me. I run a lovely XR studio in New York City called Agile Lens Immersive Design. I've got a number of my wonderful employees here. Some of you hopefully got to see some sessions in the labs from June and Whit and Dante earlier. And we do XR work across architecture and real estate and live events and social impact. And we just love to take things on that maybe have never been done before. Pretty great. I also just recently became the organizer, along with my Agile Lens friends, of the Unreal NYC meetup. Join this at meetup.com/AgileLens, meetup.com/UnrealEngine. It's unofficial. It's not affiliated with Epic Games directly, though Epic did very kindly host the very first meetup we had last week. Even if you're not in New York, we're doing live streams, talks, guests, whatever. And that will be fun for all. I also host the unofficial Unreal Engine podcast. Did a very quick Unreal Fest episode just on that long walk from the South Concourse to the hotel the other day. That was fun. And then I am an Epic Games education partner. I have my own authorized training center in New York, the only one, and therefore the best one. And you can sign up for classes. We've been having a lot of fun with corporate training and students of all sorts, and especially, XR, metahumans, things like that. We have a lot of fun with. Yeah, the only one, therefore the best. So before we go deep dive into the Collab viewer template, I want to point out a few other talks from Unreal Fest and the Unreal Inside Unreal channel that are also related to these. We've touched on the Collab viewer template in all these for different reasons, and these are just good related source material if you want to expand your knowledge beyond what we're going to cover in the next 40 minutes or so. First, I'd like to start with a brief survey of the room. Who, before seeing the name of my talk, had heard of the Collab viewer template? Show of hands. Okay, for those watching at home on YouTube, it's maybe half the room. How many of you have tried out and opened and messed around with the Collab viewer template? Maybe a few more hands, but still roughly half the room. Now, how many of you have actually actively used the Collab viewer template on a project and been like, cool, this was helpful? Really? That's amazing. Okay, for those at home, no one raised their hands, which sets up a really interesting challenge and something exciting, which I feel could become kind of confrontational, where I'm going to be like, here's all the cool things about it, here's how we've used it, and I want people to fight me on this and be like, here's why you're wrong and why it's not useful. But I was not expecting no hands. That's great. Love it. We're off to a great start. So let's start it with an overview for those who are not super familiar with it. The Collab viewer template has a bunch of components. It's a component-based template, very modular, that gives you access to a lot of wonderful tools for everything from exploded axonometrics, very useful in architecture, to X-raying things. It has multiplayer. It has transform tools for you to move things around. It has connections to Datasmith. It has something kind of similar to the Revit section box tool for moving around. This is a project, by the way, made by June on my team back in architecture school. We've had fun building a course around this. And I should mention, by the way, that today's talk is a bit of a hybrid of a course that June and I created for Epic Games and Unreal Academy, but then we're going to spice that up and make it less academic by showing you some actual case studies of things in the wild. But the course that you're going to see pieces of today is a 2-hour deep dive into all the different components of the Collab viewer. So we'll whiz by some of that stuff, but hopefully you still get a sense of things that are exciting, and maybe you take a class with us sometimes to learn more. But you see the measurements tool, the navigation tool. We'll dive into all of this stuff. So yeah, what is it? It's a great out-of-the-box multiplayer template. It's cross-platform. You can do things in desktop. You can do things in VR, and then of course you have all of these different annotation tools and whatnot, so your team can review a design, talk about it. You've got the ability to like save all your markups and everything that you've done in the project together. It's almost like a easier to use version of, for those who know what the multi-user editing feature is in Unreal that gets used for things like virtual production. That can be kind of complicated to set up. You need everyone on the same network or a VPN, and there's a lot of ways that it can break. And you can do a lot of the same things here with everyone seeing each other and moving things and annotating things together, but much easier to set up, as you'll see. But I do want to point out, it's just a starting point. Like, by the end of your project, it's probably not going to look like the Collab VR template anymore. You're going to want to pull pieces from this. You're going to want to pull code. You're going to want to look at this as a reference point for being like, oh, okay, that's how I get players to join the session and assign each of them a color and, you know, make sure that I can track where they are and change their pawns and all that. But it really is meant to be just a starting point and not the be-all, end-all of your product. I've also been told, don't use it for actual games. It's more of like an enterprise tool, you know, smaller teams and whatnot. Where can you find it? It is in the Epic Games launcher. It is a template. There's 2 variations of it, one for architecture, one for automotive, but a lot of the tools are quite similar. First thing you're going to see when you pop into the Collab VR template is a login map. And actually, you know what? Let's get away from the slides a little bit. Let's actually try some of this in practice. And so to do that, I have to start with a little bit of a story. If I pull up the right thing here. My team and I were at Galaxy's Edge on Saturday, very recently, and we were scanning it for fun. I'll tell you more about why later. And we decided for today to just throw this all into a pretty fresh Collab VR template project and see what we could do with it. So there's not a lot of modifications here, but I wanted to show you what it looks like a little bit when we're inside of here. Notice that I'm not running standalone. This isn't a packaged build. I'm directly in Pi, good old play-in editor. And I'm not going to host a session because we've got a session going on at our office right now. And we've done one little modification to the code that I'll also show you in this presentation to make it so that I'll automatically join that session in the office. And so what you're seeing here is all these fun raw scans. So this is raw scan data of going around Galaxy's Edge. And what you're also going to see is some of my lovely team members in there. And they're moving around, and they're starting to play with using some of the Collab VR template tools. So we'll check in on that in a little bit, but we'll give you like a little bit of a preview of, you know, some of the data in here. So the idea, of course, would be that we start with all this this cornucopia of raw scan data, and then we start to figure out like what's useful, what isn't, and then how we might clean this up into something that's going to look a little bit more like the things you know and love in the world of Star Wars. But even as I'm just kind of flying around here, let me show you some of those tools that we've already looked at briefly. First of all, notice that we've got a scale here, so I can change my scale from, say, 1 to 50, and it makes me much bigger. And you would think that this would be something that you notice in VR, because, of course, you're a much bigger avatar. This does not actually have an association with the world to meter system in VR. You can set that up pretty easily. I mean, it's a console variable. You can do VR.world to meters and change it. But this is really just about changing your pawn size and really just the speed at which you navigate in the world. Going over just along the navigation toolbar here, we have fly mode. And fly mode, of course, lets me use all the same editor keys, W, A, S, D, Q, E, to move around the level and see different things. You can see my giant avatar shadow there. I'll maybe make my scale back to normal. I'm sure I look very scary to everyone else as a giant avatar right now. And then walk mode would be a little bit tricky here, because if I do walk mode, it's going to take into account gravity, and I'm going to drop to nothingness in this case, because there isn't really a floor. But that's really good, of course, for understanding, oh, hello Dante, giant Dante there, to move around in the scene. Orbit mode is kind of interesting because this lets you pick a particular like pivot point somewhere. It is looking for a collision, but then I can do things like, you know, zoom out and get a more, you know, holistic view of the entire scene rotating around here. And then lastly, we have VR mode here. Now what's cool about this, and this makes it quite different from something like the out-of-the-box VR template, is this allows you to start in desktop mode, but then also go to VR. Now, I think for this to actually work in VR, first I gotta activate my session, but I might for this also actually need to be in a standalone game. So once my controller wakes up, we'll see what happens if I hit VR mode here. So if I click this right now, it doesn't go into VR mode. This is the one part where you actually need to be either in a packaged game or standalone. But I can pop out of here pretty easily. To make VR mode work, I just go to standalone game instead of play in editor, and then we'll get back into it in just a second here. as it goes over to the right. But what's cool, unlike the VR template, which exclusively puts you into VR, this actually lets you swap back and forth in real time. So I'm going to join a session, next, and it's going to pop me right back in. Cool. There we are, full screen now. And everyone's still in there. Everything everyone's doing is still going to register. And also want to note before I go into VR that anytime anyone wants to save things, they can go in here and they can download the game state of what everyone's been up to. And that just creates a .save file, the kind of save game slot that gets used a lot in Unreal Engine. And then that can get loaded up. Also notice we have out-of-the-box mic options here, and of course the ability for everyone to be on different platforms. So right now everyone else is in their laptops, and I can just go right into VR by clicking this, and we're going to activate VR mode. It takes a second to warm up here. And of course, this is great, because if we're trying to review all this point cloud data, and we were just here on Saturday, it's really handy for me to get a sense of how this feels at scale as I start to move around this admittedly messy scene. Hello there, blue person. Notice I don't actually see the names of anyone here in VR. And the menu that I pull up, we'll look at the menu. Oh, it actually says June. It's just a little bit off for some reason. But if I pull up the menu by pressing the A button, it's very similar to the menu that we'll see if we press the space bar in desktop mode. So there's a few things I can do here. I can do transform, and if I have like collisions set up on things, I can grab objects and move them around if I'm starting to like place where we think different elements of this point cloud data fit together as a bit of a puzzle piece. I can also reset it. I can do annotations. I can do some kind of tilt brush-esque drawing if I find a particular spot where I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of see what the rest of this should look like. And want to mark it up in the ways that I would normally do with like a red line on trace paper back when I was more of a standard architect sort of person. We've got some annotation tools, so I can click on something and then start to type out a message there. A little bit harder to do in VR. I'll show you that in the desktop mode. X-ray mode is cool when you've got some more standard meshes in here because you can make things invisible. The snapshot mode is kind of cool because it actually gives me this separate camera object that I can grab and move around. And if I want to take a picture of my team and do like group photo, Agile Lens, cool. I take a screenshot and it saves into my saved folder. And that's kind of handy just for keeping track of where things are at any given time. We've also got the measurement tool, again, for annotations. It's also one of the only places in Unreal that you can actually start to do things in Imperial. You can make all the measurements in metric. We can go to bookmark, create bookmark, and that will set up different camera views for anyone who's used bookmarks before in Unreal Engine, Control 1, Control 2, Control 3, etc. But instead of just being in the editor, they also persist in the multiplayer session. And then the 3D cut volume, I'm actually not sure, shows you how fresh this project is, if this will work inside with a point cloud system. But you can see that I'm expanding this box here, and it should allow me, again, we usually do this with meshes, to decide whether we see only what's inside or only what's outside. And it looks like in this case, yeah, this is more of a mesh-based system. So I'll show you some of these things in the more traditional kinds of projects that we have, but thought it'd be kind of fun to start mocking this up and get the Agile Lens team into a project here to start to explore things together. And then again, what's cool about this is I can come, what's really cool is when it crashes. That's my favorite part. But what's quite nice is if that didn't happen, I could just go right back into desktop mode with no muss, no fuss. And here we are. I can just go right back into selected viewport. Alex, it's not hard to get back in, And when you, of course, crash in a standalone session, you don't run into the same problems where you need to start the whole engine up again. It just crashed the standalone element, so now I'm back in. I'm here, and I can show you a few more of these tools in a slightly less VR-y kind of way. So I can hold down the space bar. Again, we have the transform tool. We got some annotation tools. So when you draw here, it's going to be based on the angle that your camera is facing, so a little different than when you're in VR. So you see that there. X-ray, again, would be for meshes. We have our snapshots. We have the ability to do some measurements. So if I go add here, and I want to start figuring out like the distance between 2 points, yeah, I mean, what's going on here is it's looking for mesh data. So, okay, so I'll let the team keep messing around here on the side, but that's why we've got so many different projects ready to go. So we'll check in with the team in a little bit and see if they've modified anything over there toward the end of the session. But let's go ahead and open up this project that we've used for teaching before and show you a couple more of those things. So I go ahead and I hit play. I can fly around. Here's June's lovely building. And what we can do with mesh data as opposed to point cloud data is things like jump to some different bookmarks. So see, we've got some saved views here. So I could jump to the inside of the building here, and I might want to take some measurements. So I could go to the measurement tool, add, and say, what's the distance between this column and this column? And notice by default, it gives you meters. Remember, Unreal Engine is in centimeters, but I can also tell that to go to imperial, 26 foot 9.5. Very useful. We also have this really nice explode blueprint, which we'll go into a little bit more detail about. And you'll see that as I zoom out or just bookmark myself over to another spot in the scene, maybe we'll go outside, that with the explode tool here, this is a very easy way to actually pull apart any geometry you have in your scene and then put it back together as you like. So you can imagine, yeah, it's using the timeline and that sort of thing. And then we have the ability to import Datasmith files, GLB files, GLTF files at runtime, which is quite nice. Transform tool also, I can grab any element of the project and start to move it around as long as it's set to movable and not locked in. I actually don't know. Yeah, there we go. It's like, I'm not sure what in here we actually allow for moving around. But yeah, that can save, at any given time when I've changed some things, maybe I go and I start to X-ray things like the site there. Anytime I've got changes I've made that I like, I can go here and I can save that and say, X-ray mode or whatever, X-ray site. And then I can always return to that there. What else we got over here? We have that 3D cut volume. Let's take a look at that. So when I add this into the scene, it'll look at first very similar to what I did in VR, but we'll actually see it in its full glory here since we've actually got a mesh. And so you see by default, it's cutting through the geometry here. So it's a nice little section cut through the building. But what I can also do is invert it. And I can do include, exclude, and now I'm just focused on what's inside of here. Back when computers were less powerful, 10 or so years ago when I was doing a lot of complicated VR projects that required a lot of optimization, I would do this a lot on the workflow from Revit to Unreal Engine, for example. I'd do a section box in Revit, and I would grab just the data I needed. I'd make it coarse. I'd turn off all the categories I didn't need, and I would export, just the top of the fly towers at the shed at Hudson Yards, for example, so we could just be laser focused on reviewing that element of the project. So this can be really handy. Okay, let's go back to a few slides. If I can get out of there, and we'll dive into some of this stuff in a little more detail. Okay, so I did want to mention over here that we can, of course, change the logo. It's very easy. I'll show you where to do it. And then the difference between these three options. Host a session, obviously you're the host. Other people can join you. By default, works great with a local network. If you want to do it over the internet, like we're doing here, we're just on the conference Wi-Fi connecting to our host in New York City. All you need to know is the IP address, and you just need to have port 777747s open, similar to any other kind of multiplayer game. Local session means you're just doing it on your computer, but there's also some opportunities to test multiplayer locally with a lot of additional, fake players if you just want to make sure everything is replicating appropriately. So we looked at this briefly. We can save things in the upper left, save game states. We have our viewer menu brought up with spacebar or the A button if you're in VR, and then we have our navigation menu up top. And again, this will all be in the deck for anyone who grabs it, so I'm going to fly through these pretty quick. But yeah, you bring it up with spacebar, B button. And I did want to mention here, of course, that this is all, again, component-based. So you see on the right, this is the fly mode pawn, for example, and you see all the different buttons, essentially, that are there attached to that pawn that will come up when you bring up the viewer menu. So very easy to remove those, add new ones, etc. I really like the component-based nature of this blueprint. So yeah, we'll see very quickly. Again, movement, annotation, snapshots, X-ray mode. We'll give one click there for the X-ray, boop. Measurements we saw, BP explode we saw, scaling we got a sense of. Bookmarks, you also see that some of these things like bookmarks you can do in the editor, not just at runtime. And there's a nice balance of like editor-specific things versus how you prepare the project for a review session. And then 3D cut volume we saw, and I'll show you real quick the Datasmith runtime example here, where we grab a Datasmith file, .u Datasmith. This is how a lot of data gets over to Unreal. With Fab, of course, you can get GLBs, GLTFs very easily, and we put a nice little hat on top of the building. The navigation modes, we have fly, again, the ability to actually move around wherever you want. There's no regard for collision in this setting. You can just jump through whatever geometry you want to. Walk mode respects gravity, so you are constrained by, the actual ground plane, and it's a really good way to get a sense of what it actually feels like to move through the building. That's always been something very important to me in architecture, which is a challenge sometime in VR where people are teleporting, is really getting that sense of moving through a space, feeling when it's tighter, feeling when it opens up, and being able to have the option to go between those is really helpful. Orbit mode we discussed as well. This is more like the city scale version. You just want to get a sense of how this fits into the larger landscape. And now we go, of course, into VR mode. So what's kind of cool is we just over now, like this is the Rosin hotel room here, Marshall and I were messing around with trying to get everything working, not just with desktop VR, as I just showed you, but with other platforms. So we got it to work with Quest, and we did get it to open in Vision Pro with like full pass-through and all that. We just need to add in like the extra hand tracking to like progress through the menus. But just wanted to be very clear that this is intended to be very cross-platform. And then, again, I mentioned that one of my favorite things about the cross-compatible nature of the template is the fact that you are able to go back and forth between desktop mode and VR mode, even in the same session. And the magic node that I feel not enough people know about, and I've given like a quick little UE tip about this before, but like find enable HMD. If you've got everything set up, that enable HMD Boolean will let you go in and out of VR mode. And I'm showing you both that node as well as in the player controller, where it's also checking to see if you have a VR headset and picking the appropriate pawn accordingly for that. So we thought very quickly, because this hasn't been documented anywhere, to fly by really quick, again, review this at your own leisure, how to get this template working in standalone VR, specifically the MetaQuest, but it should work with other platforms as well. Special shout out to Squishydo, who originally walked through this in the forums. We made some little modifications, but it's based on his efforts there. So you want the MetaXR plugin, you get that into your project. You have Start in VR, you disable use split screen, make sure your project settings are set for mobile and scalable, all the same kinds of optimizations you would do if you're trying to get something to work on, a mobile platform. Then in the login menu pawn, you just want to make sure that this is something that's going to be out in front of your face and more clickable. So we have some places to put that. Then in the widget main menu, there's a place where you need to bypass some of the logic in here to get past the username field. It'll auto-generate a random username for you and then get you over into the rest of the experience. There also is a note in here that we're not quite sure about, where it says to also bypass the part where it checks for the platform. Normally it's like, oh, it's Android. Okay, let's make sure that we're responding appropriately. A standalone VR headset should show up as Android, but again, this is something that seems to work either way in our case. And then there's some logic in the menu pawn that also helps with making sure this is going to work well in standalone VR. So just flying by our 10 steps here and getting everything to work correctly, but I wanted to make sure this like exists in a more public way than a little forum post that can be hard to find sometimes. So just giving some attention to that, and then you'll suddenly be in standalone VR, getting into your sessions and moving around this project. Noting in the default template, the trees are very heavy, very expensive. They have world position offset on, so be careful about that. The other thing I want to mention is that it's just about the trees. No, but we got past that. And then one other thing too I want to mention here is that there's kind of a secret AR mode. I was talking to Victor Broden about this, and this was something that was like going to be part of the collaborative viewer template as well. It didn't get built out very far. It's hidden by default, but it's there. There's an AR pawn, there's an AR button, and if anyone wanted to be so bold as to try to like build out the rest of the logic of that, in theory, it could work with everything else. But in that vein of like AR, sometimes it's really useful to see digital content in the context of the real world. This is new and working. We confirmed it this morning, roughly 4 a.m., that in 5.6 there is now an OpenXR pass-through feature. Again, thanks to Victor Broden for this. And there's just a few lines you need to change in your default engine INI that actually allow you to now access pass-through, mixed reality mode across all OpenXR devices, and it doesn't require any special third-party plugins or anything like that. So now you can walk around whatever project you have in multiplayer, in the actual site here. Kind of cool. And here's just a brief look of us testing it in 5.6 in the hotel room, confirming the VR template looks normal. But then, of course, when you look up, you can see that it's actually passed through, and there's hands. I know, they look giant, right? It's like we're in the BFG or something. Okay, now let's run through a few of these specific case studies where I try to convince you that this really is a useful template, not just academic, because we have dog-fooded it ourselves. And we think about the way that we approach using the collaborative viewer template in two different kind of ways. Like, do we want quick out-of-the-box multiplayer, or do we want the modular component system that's going to give us quick access to different elements that we want to activate with a UI that's set up for, desktop and VR and all these different platforms? And so we're usually approaching a new project of needing one or two or both of those angles. So for example, in some projects, we start with just the multiplayer part. We have our Christmas Carol show that's been going since 2021. We started with the Collab viewer template both in the 2022 and 2024 versions. I'll show you a little bit of our co-location template, which is the mixed reality senior content in the space, but like really well set up. I've been giving demos to some of you of that over the past few days. Blueprint Immersive, which is our architecture tool, and some of the work we're doing with the Royal Shakespeare Company. So very briefly, going to whiz through these pretty fast. Christmas Carol VR, this is something we've been doing for a long time, and we've been trying to figure out ways to get as many people into a live VR theater show as possible. It's also going to be live again in about a week at the Raindance Immersive Festival. Come join us, xmascarolvr.com. And this was a really useful way to, again, be cross-platform, have multiplayer set up, and to start to use some of the systems that are just right there in the Collab viewer template to see things like the different colors of the characters, which actually, yeah, you can see a little bit in this slide at the top there. So that's actually based on the Collab viewer template, where you see all these randomly generated Victorian names and everyone's set up there. The co-location template, so you guys will recognize this as the Rosen Hotel. So you can see we have Dante and Marshall here playing with some cubes that are replicated, and they both see the table in the same place, synced up to actual furniture, and it's just a nice system that works really well as you move around. So there's mixed reality, it's got multiplayer, it's got replicated physics, and so again, the Collab viewer template is a great starting point for that. We also have this project we've been doing that is a way to visualize floor plans and geometry wherever you are and kind of locking that to the floor. And again, you've got this menu system here that allows you to start to set up a way to enable and disable passthrough, to bring in different elements. And even though some of this is not actually based directly on the Collab viewer template, studying that code, studying those blueprints, learning lessons from that has helped us with developing our own system for, pulling out the different elements for this particular project that we need. Theater rehearsal tool with the Royal Shakespeare Company. We've got this digital twin of the Swan Theater. Right now they've got their production of Titus Andronicus running, and we've been working on this cross-platform rehearsal tool that works both for the people who are there on site as well as remote collaborators who are coming in. And you can see a little bit of the script here, the characters, and some of the UI buttons that are set up for showing and hiding things. And again, based on inspiration from the Collab viewer template, we can bring those into VR as well so that you don't just have to be doing all these stage management tools from a desktop machine. You can also do this stuff also from VR. And you can see a little bit of how we're using some blueprint logic to share these anchors that set up a co-located shared experience. Yeah, also in the hotel over there, just to give you a sense of how fresh and hot off the presses this is. So yeah, there's the Swan Theater, and we're using like really simple capsules to kind of block out where people are and make sure we can see them as we get our characters and props and figure out where everyone's going to be, blocking the actors as they move around the stage, and figuring out a lot of things both for people who are on site with you and then also bringing in remote collaborators together. So pretty fun. And then in some projects, yeah, we don't even worry about the multiplayer side. It's just helpful to have those components that are there and ready to go. So the Collab viewer template is where we really got excited by the Datasmith runtime features, and I'll actually dive into that a little bit more for you as well. But even if you're just in a single player session, really helpful to be able to have basically an empty Unreal Engine project. Like when we package this, it's 100 megabytes, but we're bringing all those runtime Datasmith features into there. So we're loading up a scene. We're doing something similar to data prep recipes where we're looking at metadata and converting raw geometry into blueprints. So you can like click on all the theater seats and view anything on stage. This is in partnership with our sister company, Fisher Dax Associates, Theater Planning and Design in New York City. And of course, it's tremendously helpful for the design process to be able to mark things up, annotate them, change materials, leave notes, do this over a collaborative session as well. But honestly, most of the time we are just doing this in single player. So you get a little hint of what that looks like here. Pardon me while I drink a little bit of tea. Yeah, and you can see some of the buttons are a little bit different because we've added some of our own custom components here for things like adding lights. and changing the colors and textures everywhere. Red is nice. It's a good note. And this is what it looks like, of course, when we're testing in the office, and you see another little view of the components there. And then, yes, in some projects, we bring all these things together. Another shout out to an Unreal Fest talk from a couple years ago we did with our friends at D-Box and PureBlink. We have this giant space out in Austin, Texas. We now have one in New York as well, where we do these very large-scale photorealistic walkthroughs of luxury real estate and projects like that. And this all started with tests that we were doing in the Collab viewer template. First, this is kind of what it looks like now when people go through this tour. You stand on certain footprints, and then it brings you over to other parts of the project. We'll just wait a second here to see that teleportation activate. And yeah, our magic recipe for the photorealism here, by the way, is still baking all the lighting, even in Unreal Engine 5.4 and 5.5, but doing real-time reflections and getting those to be as high fidelity as possible. So here's an early test we did that was very much the Collab viewer template, looks just like it, and we were doing this both for multiplayer and testing an early version of spatial anchors to see if we could actually locate things with a relationship between the real world, because we wanted to have this fidelity where you had these immersion multipliers, like there'd be a real physical chair at the place you have a virtual chair, and we wanted that kind of alignment. So the Collab viewer template was tremendously helpful early on in that design process. So let's talk a little bit about Datasmith and how we use that in things like Blueprint Immersive, because I think it's really handy and hopefully benefits you as well. So not going to do a deep dive into Datasmith, but you download the plugin for whatever DCC tool you use. You're going to organize your hierarchy or export as a uDatasmith file, and then you can import it as something that's going to live in your project, or it can be something that's only in there at runtime. So that's kind of the pipeline that Unreal Engine likes to get you to think about. And we have a bit of a Rhino example here. As this data is brought over into Unreal, you see the translation of layers. In other projects, it'll be set up differently. In Revit, for example, it's very much based on your categories. And then when you're exporting, as long as you have the plugin set up, Revit has this just by default now. It becomes a .uDatasmith file, and then you can either just import it directly like this. You can also do a direct link setup. This is an easy way, by the way, to set up your collisions, so everything's going to just work. It's not super efficient, but it'll just work if you want to use that walk mode and get a sense of moving around the scene. Direct link will allow this to be kind of a live update, so as you change things in your other project, it's very easy to get it to update back in Unreal Engine. A little bit like live link, but a little less updatey, I guess you could say. So we see June's project over here in Rhino versus what it looks like in Unreal, and how, as she's making changes in Rhino, those are also updating over there in Unreal. And so then when you do Datasmith runtime over here, again, you can select a GLB, a GLTF, or a .uDatasmith file, and it comes in like this. You can also do this as a blueprint and something that you're actually activating with certain keys. Maybe you know what the file path is going to be, and so you just set up key mapping so that these will load when you need them to. In the editor, a couple things we wanted to bring your attention to is creating your own bookmarks. You can just grab this blueprint and drop it into the scene. Yes, you can still do Control-1, Control-2, Control-3 and set up everything as you want just in your editor, but you can also set the bookmarks up this way with the blueprint so that when you enter a multiplayer session, these are all ready to go for everyone. Brief look at the explode tool and the places that you actually just drag your assets in, and you're basically going to set a condition for what it looks like when it's exploded. You set a condition for what it looks like when it's not exploded, and then it all just works out of the box. Main menu customization, just wanted to show where you can put in your own custom image in the widget main menu over there. And then also over here, there's the option for what the map is going to be called that you open when you get past the login screen. So here's where you would change that. You would want both of those nodes to match. And then if you want to extend the functionality of the Collab viewer template, just wanted to give you a couple quick examples of how you might add some new functions. So one would be, for example, if you wanted to cycle design options, something pretty common within architecture. We have another course where we actually dive into like how this whole blueprint gets set up. But the basic idea would be, for anyone who's dealt with replication, this very straightforward multicasting and switch on authority setup where you're just telling everyone to go through the different design options. And this can be with a keyboard press, but it can also be you with one of those components that lives on the graph. Another example we have is a follow host component. People get lost sometimes. You get a bunch of people who aren't used to being in real-time environments, and they might find themselves stuck in a wall. So we added this little component feature for just kind of bringing everyone to the host, and as the host moves, everyone comes along with them. Can also be handy for a museum tour, a theater show, etc., where you want to keep the group together. And we did that over, and you can see over here like how that just gets added as a component for the fly mode pawn, and that just makes it show up in the menu with everything else. And here's a brief look at some of the logic there that helps decide what the menu options will be. A little hint there at the blueprint logic, how the function gets set up, and how it looks there. Now, a lot of times, even before you're ready to rebuild everything from scratch, you might just want to make sure people aren't too distracted by buttons that are going to not work or not work quite correctly. But rather than trying to delete those things where there are still quite a few dependencies and elements of the project that could break unexpectedly, we often find that it's easier to hide functionality, collapsing widgets and things like that, rather than outright deleting them. That way people just can't click on things that you don't want them to click on. Now on the multiplayer side, we already mentioned over here that this is where you can open up some of the different widgets that pop up. For local multiplayer, you can actually just go right over here. You can do this for any project that's already set up for multiplayer, which is actually most in Unreal Engine. You can have the host play as a listen server. You can set up some different players here, and then you can watch them all directly in front of you without needing multiple computers and confirm that everything is replicating the way that you need it to. You can also do exactly what we are doing with our little with our Galaxy's Edge project, where you notice that we all joined a session automatically. And so over here, there's two different ways we like to do. One is just to find the first available session by just grabbing the array of available sessions and just jumping right into it, so you skip a step with actually needing to select one. And then the other thing we do sometimes is just have the IP address set up so that we're executing on that directly. So we know the IP address for our office, we have port 777 open, and then that just kicks us right into a session. Join right away. The other thing that we learned after a little while was we thought there was like a hard limit on there being 16 players in a session, and that's actually not true. You can have as many as you think you can handle. Like obviously there's data flow and bandwidth issues, and there's some other INI settings you can do to increase like the way that Unreal Engine handles data, but literally just this one line in your engine.game session part of your ini is where you can actually set what that cap is going to be on the number of players. We've done 120 with like simple avatars that's like actually worked okay. Obviously the mic and audio stuff becomes a mess, but hey, give it a try, and you might have some fun. Also wanted to briefly mention our friends at Cavernous, who had a talk yesterday. They built their entire platform on the Collab viewer template, and so if you're looking for like a very robust but still kind of out-of-the-box system, they're friends of ours and have a really good system that will look very familiar to anyone who's played with the Collab viewer template, but they've added a ton of other features to it. So just flying through a couple of their slides here. Okay, and then before we wrap up here, I want us to just take a quick look at what my team's been doing. So we're just gonna see if they're okay with the point cloud data, if they've cleaned up any of it, if they've added some good notes. And here we are. Oh, wow, okay. Yeah, this looks way better than what it looked like an hour ago. Good job, guys. I got a really good team working here. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Over here. Here we are. Yeah, look at this, guys. They took all that point cloud data, they've cleaned it up. It's much, much cleaner, much, much sharper now, and we're in a good place. So yeah, well done. This is actually the reason why we were scanning Galaxy's Edge on Saturday. We have this open source Star Wars project for Galactic Star Cruiser, which was the immersive theater experience that shut down. And it's a big open source project, and we're trying to do something with this a little bit like Project Titan. We want as many people involved in rebuilding this experience as possible. And because this was ostensibly a cruise ship experience, there was a part of this immersive theater experience where you dock at Batu, Galaxy's Edge, and you have to go get the coaxium and like do all these things in Galaxy's Edge. And so we figured, well, as we continue to build out this open source, fan-made, nonprofit, non-commercial project, we should actually bring in as much of the Galaxy's Edge experience as possible. So using the Collab viewer template, we've started to gather all this data, and it's not just an Agile Lens thing. This is open source. Anyone can go to github.com/AgileLens/HalcyonVR and start to look at all the scan data, submit your own scan data, clean it up, and eventually you end up with something like this, which is a very nice recreation of something that is no longer available for people to visit. So we hope you'll join us on that journey. And with that, I think I can say thank you. Appreciate the time. Thanks to my team. Another link for the deck. Yes, you can clap.